Welcome, and thanks for listening to Cherry Bekaert's Not-for-Profit podcast series. In each episode, we hear from the best in the business on the latest challenges, trends, and opportunities affecting not-for-profit organizations and educational institutions. I'm Matthew Saha, leader of Cherry Bekaert's not-for-profit industry practice. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony Cochran, part of Cherry Bekaert's Government and Public Sector Advisory Team. And I'm here today to talk with Mitt Winter regarding NIL and its impact on colleges and universities, and Cherry Bekaert and its focus on NIL and everything going on in the industry. Mitt Winter is a leading expert in NIL law, and I'm super happy to have him here today to speak with us and talk more about this topic. And I'll pass it to him to introduce himself a little more.
Hey, Anthony, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. Like you said, I'm an attorney with the law firm of Kinney Hurts Perry in Kansas City, and I do a lot of work in the college sports space, represent a lot of universities, NIL collectives, businesses doing different things in the college sports and NIL space. Have represented some athletes as well. So I've kind of seen college sports and NIL from all different angles.
Great. Yeah, exactly. I've been following your work, and everyone on our team has for a while now. We've been following the space for a long time, and let's just hop right into it. And, you've been around, you've kind of covered how you've interacted with everyone kind of involved in the NIL world. Can you walk us through kind of the early days of the NIL and some factors that have kind of led us to the current state of today? There's a bunch of big things that have happened, and I'll kind of let you take it from there and kind of fill us in from your expert opinion.
Sure. There's a common misperception amongst some people that the Supreme Court sort of let us, created NIL rights for college athletes via its Alston decision in the summer of 2021. While that decision did play a role in where we're at now, it was not that decision that ended up allowing college athletes to be able to monetize their NILs. It started well before that. There was actually a case cited in 2014 called the O'Bannon versus NCAA case, which said that the NCAA's rule that said college athletes cannot receive any compensation for their NILs violated antitrust law. And although that case ended with that decision, the NCAA didn't change its rules at that time to allow athletes to monetize their NILs. Based on that case, athletes were just able to receive more for the value of their athletic scholarship up to their cost of attendance. So kind of move forward 5 years from that O'Bannon decision, and some states start talking about passing laws that would allow college athletes to receive compensation from third parties for the use of their NILs. People were thinking, athletes should be able to enter into endorsement deals and be paid for appearing in video games and things like that. So the first state to pass a state law that would allow college athletes to do that was California in 2019. And that, at the time the law was passed, it was set to go into effect in 2023. Well, then along comes Florida. It passes its own state law, which is similar to the California one, but it has an effective date of July 1, 2021. So it moves up timeline on things about, by 2 years. Then you have this domino effect of other states start passing their own NIL laws that also have effective dates of 2021. At the same time, around the time California first passed its NIL law, the NCAA was pushing back pretty hard on that. But once that happened, and once Florida happened, and another state started happening, the NCAA kind of gave in and said, okay, we're going to start drafting our own legislation that will allow college athletes to monetize their NILs, but we're going to have, some restrictions around that. So for about a year, the NCAA was working on its own legislation about how college athletes would be able to monetize their NILs. And so they've been working on that in 2020 and 2021. Then we get to June 2021, about a month before the state laws are set to go into effect. The NCAA still hasn't passed its own NIL legislation, and the Alston decision, which I mentioned earlier, drops from the Supreme Court, and the NCAA lost that case 9-0. And as I said, that case was not about NIL. It was about what types of educationally related benefits college athletes can receive. It was another antitrust case, and it said NCAA rules limiting the value of the educationally related benefits that schools can give to their athletes violates antitrust law. But practically, it had an effect on the legislation that the NCAA was working on for NIL, because then after that decision, they're worried, well, is this legislation we're working on for NIL, is it going to violate antitrust law now based on this new Supreme Court decision? So when that case drops, the NCAA basically punts on the legislation it had been working on and put in place its interim NIL policy, which they've been operating under since July 1, 2021. And it was pretty basic. It said schools can't pay NIL compensation to their athletes. There has to be some quid pro quo for the athlete to receive NIL compensation. And the payment to the athletes can't be based on athletic performance. And NIL deals are not supposed to be used as recruiting inducements. So that's what was put in place by the NCAA July 1, 2021. So move up a few more months. Now college athletes are allowed to monetize their NILs. There was some activity right away, like the endorsement deal type of activity of athletes promoting businesses and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have formation of NIL collectives, which some of your listeners probably know are groups of fans and boosters that get together, pool their money. They use that money to enter into NIL deals with athletes at the school that they support or that they're affiliated with. And at this point in time, about 80% of the NIL dollars flowing to college athletes is coming from NIL collectives, and most of that money is flowing to football and basketball players, FBS football players, Division I basketball players, with the majority of that going to those two sports at the Power 5 level.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where we're at now in the world of NIL. It quickly changed from people thinking it would just be third parties hiring athletes to promote their businesses to now most of the money coming from the NIL collectives, which although those deals are written as, quote unquote NIL deals, they're really being paid to play a sport.
Right. Yeah, that's a common thing that has been discussed around NIL and the collectives, is that phrase that keeps getting tossed around of the Wild West, and kind of how, they're getting paid for these endorsement deals, but in reality, it's for them to come play for their particular schools. Now with that, and, kind of, we probably covered maybe 10% of everything that's happened and impacted the space and everything like that. But, with those big things being said, how have you observed these colleges and universities kind of navigating these challenges? Like, for example, collectives popping up, collectives and their tax statuses, and, the individuals involved with those. How have you observed college universities navigating, these challenges?
Yeah, I would say it really varies a lot from school to school. I think a lot of schools viewed this, this new world and uncertainty as an opportunity, and were a little more aggressive with how they were going to, use NIL to their advantage. And so schools like that were more willing to engage with and provide support to collectives, which they're allowed to do under NCAA rules. They can promote the collectives and help the collectives raise money, while other schools were a little more conservative and wary of NCAA penalties, and so have kind of stood back a little bit more. And you still have this divide of schools that are more aggressive than others, although I would say more and more schools have fully embraced it and realized that they have to embrace it for recruiting if they want to stay competitive, especially Division I or FBS football and Division I basketball. So it's kind of all over the place, and a big factor in what schools are doing is what their state law looks like. Some of the state laws, and a lot of the state laws have already been amended from the time they were first passed. And so some of those state laws allow schools to do things that are more aggressive than schools in other states that don't have a similar state law.
Yeah. Yeah, we've observed some of those state law changes as they've happened through this. Now, kind of with that being said, operating under these state laws and certain rules that are in place, what are some of the benefits that you could see from or for these athletic departments to have, very comprehensive policies and procedures in place moving forward to kind of navigate this change? And with that, is there also anything else that you think these schools should be doing that they aren't doing?
Yeah, with respect to NIL, I mean, it's already changed a lot in 3 years. There have been, as I said, changes in state law, changes in NCAA guidance. There have been court decisions that have recently affected the process that NIL can play in recruiting. So it's obviously important for schools to be up on all of that and to have procedures in place that explain how their employees can interact with collectives and how they can use NIL in recruiting and what coaches can do with respect to NIL and recruiting. So that's important from the NIL perspective. And then I think looking forward, probably going to have a world pretty soon, it could be by the end of this year, where schools are able to directly pay, whether that's NIL compensation or some other type of revenue sharing. They're going to be directly paying their athletes. And so that's different than the world we have now, where the compensation going to the athletes is coming from a third party that's not technically affiliated with the school. So I think schools really need to start preparing for that new world internally. Number one, figuring out, how much are we going to have to pay to our athletes? What's that number going to be? Are we going to have to increase our revenue? Are we going to have to reduce our expenses? And then figure out, okay, in a world where we are paying this compensation to the athletes, how are we going to actually do that? What sort of mechanism are we going to use to make that happen? So I think that's where universities need to be looking down the line, because that's definitely coming.
Yeah, definitely. Now, with that being said, it's pretty clear that there are a mixed set of rules and certain standards to follow kind of in this current process, and everyone's kind of preparing for the future state of what is going to be this new world. Where are schools getting information on, the happenings in NIL? Is there a single resource that's being used? Are they, kind of going to their kind of current advisors that are already there? Where are they kind of getting that information from? And is it the best sources per se?
Yeah, I would say that varies a lot too from school to school. Some schools have hired outside consultants that help them with NIL. Other schools just rely on their in-house employees to provide that information. So it's all over the place. I would say generally, the bigger schools that have more resources available are the ones more likely to hire third parties to come out and help them sort of navigate the NIL world. But as I also just mentioned, it's going to affect every school, especially at the Division I level. So it's something they all need to be thinking about and getting ready for.
Yeah, definitely. And I can only imagine getting ready for that is quite the challenge with everything changing so fast. I can only imagine by the time this podcast comes out, there's probably going to be some big changes that have happened in that time. So it's very interesting, and I'm glad that we are kind of exploring this topic as early as we could. Really appreciate you coming on today and kind of talking about this. Like I said, we could probably have a 10-hour podcast series covering everything. But if you were talking to our listeners of this podcast, what is the one thing that you would kind of reiterate to them to kind of think about going forward or remember from what we've talked about today?
Yeah, I would just reiterate that there's already been a lot of change in college athletics with NIL and athlete compensation, but more change is on the way. And you can't just sit around and wish for things to go back the way they were. You have to just accept the reality that things have changed and are going to change more. And if you want to continue to operate a college athletics program that's going to be competitive in the future, you need to embrace the change that's coming and prepare for it. If you just kind of sit around and say, "Oh, I don't think this is going to happen," you're going to be caught off guard, which I think happened to a lot of schools with respect to NIL. Some were more prepared than others to take advantage of the changes, and I think that's served them well so far. So I think you want to take those learnings and that perspective with respect to NIL and apply it to what's coming down the line in the future.
Great points. Again, Mitt, thank you for joining. Feel free to kind of share where people can kind of go and consume some more of your content. Like I said at the beginning, we've been following you for a while and would love to have our current clients or prospective clients for that matter, kind of start taking a look at what you're putting out and start absorbing some of this ever-changing information.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, just Mitt, MIT Winter. I'm on X/Twitter @Winter Sports Law. Those are kind of the two main platforms I use for putting info out there on social media. And then my email address is mittmit@kennyhertzperry.com. So if any of your listeners want to reach out or take a look at my stuff, those are the places to find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And to our listeners, be on the lookout. We plan to have a lot more of these conversations coming out, starting to develop our podcast series, and can't wait to have more people and maybe even Mitt on again to discuss whatever future changes are coming. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
This is Matthew again. I hope you enjoyed this episode and look forward to our next one. Don't forget to subscribe.